Well, thanks. Yeah, I think this is going to be one of the best sessions we've had. We understand we have a lot of registration and a lot of excitement about the topic. The joint working group is something that Fernando and I and many others have been working on for some time. We've had a lot of folks looking in with us, and it's great that we've gotten the support of the Construction Industry Institute, LCI, and PPI, and some dedicated team members as we've gone through. Looking at the next slide here, we can talk a bit about what we're really trying to do is we're trying to build upon the wisdom of these three organizations who are doing a lot of work into improving project performance. And what we're recognizing is a lot of it's very complementary, and we'll be able to do better working as a team than just independently. And so if we take the understanding from these groups, we'll get better understanding, and that'll develop better project leaders. And that's why I hope you're on this webinar, is to get a better understanding, become a better project leader, and then we'll have some better projects. So looking at today's webinar and who we have, this is a great team because we have Gary Fischer, Will Lichtig, and Mark Guy, and between them, they have decades of experience on very large projects, and they also have you can recognize they'll have the perspective of CII, LCI, and PPI. And so Gary, for example, has a great background in a large energy project. Will has done all kinds of projects in commercial space and healthcare, and Mark has done large mega projects in the nuclear space and others. And so with that in mind, I'd like to give them a chance to introduce themselves and why it is that they think that this is a worthwhile topic to talk about contracts. Gary, you wanna head us out?
Yeah, glad to kick it off here, John. Thank you for the intro and the opportunity to share some thoughts. Again, I've spent a few decades, like 41 years with Chevron, all in the function of project management, worked on projects around the US, around the globe, my entire career. So I've devoted my life to project development and execution in the oil and gas industry, and now enjoying some time as executive director of the Project Production Institute. And I think this topic is really interesting to me because I don't think there's a more emotive topic in project management than contracting strategy for some reason. Some see it as the root cause of performance problems. Too often, contracting strategy is dictated by controlling powers, or we've always done it that way, or some vested interest in. Then you throw legal into the mix, and we can even get more challenging to generate legally skin in the game, right? So over the course of those 41 years with Chevron, we tried every different contracting strategy and approach imaginable, ranging from the bookends, EPC lump sum, all the way to fully reimbursable. We tried alliance contracting. We tried dozens of different schemes for incentive-based contracting, and all that. We kind of found it was a second-order issue. So what do I mean by second-order issue? We found we had good projects that were EPC lump sum, good projects and bad projects. We had good projects and bad projects with alliance contracting. We had good projects and bad projects with fully reimbursable. So what's going on? Why the variation there? Well, we came to believe that there's something deeper going on, meaning the foundation that we were building on was not solid, and that was the differentiator. So we needed a clear definition of scope. Managing the production system, I'm going to talk about that just more in a minute. The ability to manage external influences on the project, understanding that we as an owner held all the risk regardless of the type of contracting we had. And what really was important, it had a lot to do with the nature of the relationship we had with the contracted partners. When the stars aligned and we had our relationships with the contractors that were transparent and trust was developed, we did better together, pretty plain and simple, regardless of the form of contract. But when we played the old cat and mouse owner contractor game, we almost always found ourselves into trouble along the way. So coming back to why I think this is a second order issue, I found that our real issue was rooted in, this is dwarf contracting, okay, is in the project management practices that we use, which were really incomplete, meaning we only had a partial foundation that we were building ourselves on for a particular project. We were very focused on what would be done, when would be done, and who we would have do it. What we were missing was the how the work would actually be done. That led me to discover project production management, the production side of projects, the missing half of project management. So what I find this next gen work really important. I think it's something that needs to be done. You know, we all have different practices. We experience different practices, AWP, lean practices, IPD, and it's important to keep in mind we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. You know, on the same goal. We want to improve project performance. We wanted to be able to deliver the goods. And I've been telling you, trying to sort out what to use when and how to navigate through all that can be kind of overwhelming and confusing. So at least it was for me. I know that. So I think this next gen effort is really important, that we try to bring some clarity on what makes sense, how these practices work together, arm in arm, to help drive project results. So coming back specifically to contracting on this topic, what I'd like to see us do is get focused on first designing the optimal project production system, so we're all working off a good foundation, then select a contracting strategy that best enables that system. So that's my 2 cents to get us started. And Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Gary. Folks, I'm been with a large nuclear power organization for 32 years. Then I stopped there. I was on the owner side, obviously. And then I went over and I became a contractor, and I worked there for over 10 years. So I have a good perspective of both sides of the fence. One of the major things that I kept finding over and over again, that there was very little thought and effort put towards the type of contract we were struck. Like as Gary mentioned, it was always, well, that's why we've always done it, or this is the way that we do it from the beginning. And what that ended up doing was harming us down the road. And I didn't even realize it until years later when I look back and said, gosh, you know, that's not the way we should have probably approached that. We should have done something else. So we want to talk about that today. So I'm going to hand it off to Will.
Thanks, Mark. So some people say that I'm a lawyer by training, but an innovator by birth. And that's really how I came to this issue of different methods of contracting. About 25 years ago, I had become increasingly dissatisfied with the role lawyers played in the construction industry. We were like vultures living off the waste of failed projects, and began investigating ways that we could improve project delivery and the way that contracts could really support that. So I won't go through all the details here, but I linked up with Sutter Health out in California. We transformed the way that projects were delivered for Sutter, and in order to accomplish that, we came up with a new contracting method called integrated project delivery. I'm the author of the initial integrated form of agreement for lean project delivery, which, as Gary and Mark have suggested, not only changed the commercial terms, but also focused very directly on changing the way the teams behaved, the way that teams were organized, the way that decisions were made, and that the way the work was actually performed both during design and construction. So we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that. But for the last 10 years plus now, I've been with the Boldt company, which is a large general contractor. We do work both in healthcare, power, industrial. And so I'll try to share some of the observations of what I've learned now being in the belly of the beast for the last 13, 14 years. Turn it back to you, Fernando.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. With great topics. I can see that everybody's very passionate about this. But here's our first question I'd like to ask. Why are we still talking about contracts? You know, hasn't the industry thoroughly exercised this topic and arrived at best methods? You know, Gary, you spoke a lot about it. You know, and what else do you think is part of the challenge here? Why are we still doing this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're still talking about it because so many people see contracting as a key to unlocking performance, and don't really see that the real solutions lie in the foundation and the project production. There are other reasons, and we'll probably talk about them here as a group. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's really a secondary issue, second order issue. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter, and it does matter. Even a project running on a complete foundation with like perfect project production management can still go sideways if the contracting isn't aligned and the right kind of relationships aren't created. Okay, so let me give you a quick example. We had a multi-billion-dollar investment that we were making in Africa at a very remote location, a mangrove, a complex process facility, new technology. we knew this was not a good place for EPC lump sum. Okay, we just knew it. It wasn't rocket science. Okay, so we did our best. The government was, our controlling interests were determined that this would be EPC lump sum, and we worked hard with the staff groups to convince them and show them data on why this wasn't a good idea. About every time we got really close to getting support and alignment for doing something different, potential bidders would show up, meet with our regulator, and all of a sudden we were back to EPC lump sum again. Well, you know, and the project played out that way. We were unable to change it. We knew going into it, it was a bad idea. And let your imagination run wild for a minute. You name it, and it happened to us. All right, it was just out of control. The contractor was not able to control the local conditions. New technology ate us up with changes, and it got so difficult. Kind of mid-flight, our contractor said, "We quit. This is just too hard." And that was not a fun day. It's one of those moments, you know where you were when you got the call. I still remember sitting in my office in Houston. They walked in and said, "We quit." It was quite a day. So, you know, and I think maybe we're still talking about it because we haven't found the optimal lens to look at it through yet. Because it's not viewed as, not seen and known as a second order issue, we're not dealing with the base problems first. So I don't know, those are some thoughts. Mark, you want to add to that or disagree with that?
Yeah. So, folks, one of the things that I find really suffers with the wrong contract style and selection is the teamwork erosion. You know, the team's not really working together. I'll give you an example. We were doing an overhaul on one of the nuclear units I was on, a multi-million-dollar piece of work, and it was downtime is a bad thing, you know, because we're not producing power, so it's tracked very closely. We are on critical path. You know, I'm insisting on 100% turnovers between the different groups. We have about 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of craft groups in doing work. The people I'm working with, they are shrewd people. I mean, I've been on the other side too. They have got a business plan. They have put a quote in for the work at a very low rate, so they know that they're right on the margins of profit. And these folks have got goals. They've paid their project managers bonuses for meeting certain performance levels, etc. And they are motivated. And of course, they are competitors. So I've got 5 or 6 different groups that are competing against each other, and they don't want to be held up, not for a minute. And so what happened was, I am the project manager of this job. Work starts to delay. One of the groups is short some electricians. So I say, "Oh gosh, you guys, you need to get this done. You're going to miss the handoff." And they come back and say, "We are really tight, and I'm not sure we have enough. Craft guys are hard to find." I go to one of the other groups and I say, "Guys, we need to give one of your, a couple of your electricians to this group over here because we're going to miss the milestone." And of course, the answer back is, "Well, if you had given us that scope of work from the beginning, then we'd be okay. But sorry, that doesn't work today." So I get that. I've been on that side. You have got a bonus that you want to meet, and you don't want anything to get in your way. But from a teamwork point of view, I was losing, and that was just not a good day. So teamwork erosion is a problem with certain kinds of contracts. Over to you, Bill.
You bet. So if you would, for the folks on the call here today, you're all taking notes, draw a triangle if you would. On one side of the triangle, write the word organization. On another side of the triangle, write commercial terms or just put a $sign. And then at the bottom of the triangle, put operating system. So here's what we found over time and why we're still talking about contracts. In order for a project to be highly functional, those 3 legs of the triangle have to work together. And you have to have an organization structure, how people are brought onto the team, how they work together, how they make decisions, which aligns with the way that work is actually performed. So you think of the operating system as being like lean project delivery is a new operating system. It's in project production management is a new operating system. And then the commercial terms are how you make risk flow and money flow on a project. If you think about it, go back 50 years, somebody had the idea, well, we can just change the risk and reward structure by going to design build or EPC, and that'll cure all the problems that we have on projects. And you've already heard from both Mark and Gary that it ain't just ain't so. So then we thought, well, maybe it's just we got to work together better. So the government came up with partnering, and we added partnering on top of contracts. And as long as things were going well, things went really well. And when things weren't going well, everybody ran behind the risk allocation, and it caused everybody to lob grenades at each other. So what we really discovered about 20 years ago is that if you're going to change the operating system, then you probably need to look at the organization structure in a way that empowers people to make really good decisions, because there's so much technical expertise out there that no one person or one organization really has all the expertise to drive and manage a project towards success. You really need people to cooperate and integrate and work together. And then you need to wrap it in a commercial system that actually rewards people for playing by these rules. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, again, sometimes on projects, you get project staff that it's like they have 1 foot on the dock and 1 foot on the boat. Yep. They have a foot on the dock that they know that projects should be delivered differently. We should work together differently. We should use this new operating system. And they have a commercial model that rewards them for doing things in an old-fashioned way. And when that commercial model starts to pull away from the dock, they pretty quickly abandon all these different ways of working together and align themselves to be behind the commercial system, because that's the way their bosses measure them. So again, the reason I think we're still talking about contracts is we haven't found a way across the industry to rebalance the 3 sides of the triangle, so that our commercial system, our contracts, are really reinforcing integration, collaboration, and this foundational new way of working together. I'll turn that back to you guys.
Will,
Yeah, that sounds great.
I love your triangle.
There's a lot of common themes in there, and it turns out, it's not just the contracting strategy. You can't solve the organizational and the process flow issues with the contract just by motivating people. That was great. So that's very kind of closely related to our next question. We'll start out with Mark for, what are the biggest misconceptions you see out there? What is it about contracts that people don't get? I'm reminded briefly the quote by Mark Twain that it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for damn sure that just ain't so. And so what are those things that we know for sure that just aren't so, that may be holding us back?
So I'm going to start off with, what are the biggest misconceptions? One of the things that I found shocking was that it's always a win-win. Both sides will win on every contract. You go in there, you know what you're going to do. You're going to get your little piece of the pie. And that absolutely is not the case. What I didn't understand as a young project manager is that the contract groups have got their own business plan. They have got their own strategy to try and maximize the hours that they are on the job and the return they're going to get for that. So you've got that dynamic going on. And as a young project manager, I just assume everyone's trying to help us out to get this job done. And so you've got to go in with that I guess mindset to understand what is the best combination of contract that will allow me to get to the end in the most productive way for the least risk. And so that is I thought it was just a given, and it's been done for many years, so I don't need to reinvent it, but that is absolutely not the case. You have to look at that each and every time. Will, I'm going to hand it off to you. What do you think that means?
Yeah, so this is going to sound a little bizarre coming from a recovered lawyer, but there's a fantasy that you can actually contract risk away. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. It's really a fantasy. And I'd ask you to think about projects that you've been involved with where you were confident that you had contracted the risk away, that somebody else was responsible for the problems on a project, and that other party just turned tail, put their head between their legs and walked away and said, I'll just absorb this because the contract says this is my responsibility. It's a fantasy. Okay, so we ought to become mature enough to understand that risk on projects has become so complex that the way to skin risk is really through collective risk management. So rather than contracting risk away, to actually collectively embrace the risk, tap into the talent of the team, and identify the best way to address the risk rather than, again, just trying to think that you've contracted it away and it'll take care of itself. So for me, again, that's one of the biggest challenges or the biggest misconceptions, is that somehow we can contract away risk. Mark or Gary?
Gary?
Yeah, I would double down on that, Will. From an owner's perspective, that was one of my biggest ahas, is that we could actually contract away risk. At the end of the day, we were still holding the bag. No matter what happened, we will always end up holding the bag. We held all the risk. We tried to mitigate that risk through contract terms and various forms. Some works, most didn't work, quite frankly. Liquidated damages is one of the worst concepts known to mankind. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, probably. The second one is a little bit different. Again, from an owner perspective, thinking that an owner can have minimal involvement in the investment that they're making and be happy with the end result.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just fast. It's always been fascinating to me to interact with different companies that say, oh, we can just hire a contractor to do that. We just turn it over to them and they will do that. Well, it's like they're not clairvoyant. They can't read your mind. And I could tell you story after story after story where that happened. And the people that had to show up and make that occupy the building or operate the facility at the end of the day showed up and said, well, this isn't what we wanted. This won't work. And hands were thrown up and income was deferred and the thing went negative from a financial point of view. It's just to think that as an owner, you can spend all this money and not be actively involved and engaged in your project, in your expenditure is not wise. I'll just put it that way, it's not wise.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Wow, some interesting takeaways out of all this. I like the win-win. Everybody goes into the win-win, and until the project starts, and all of a sudden things change and you revert back. And risk management is really key. That's been along in my career is how do you really manage risk? You can list it, but you can't tackle it as one organization. It requires a lot of different folks and participants. So let's move into another question. How do you see contracting issues affect the workflow and project operations? Or the ability to get the work done. So let's start with Will.
Sure. Let me give an example from a recent project that we've been on. This was a customer in the industrial segment that had a long history of design, bid, build contracting. And over the course of a number of years, we've been working with them to understand the differences in the target value design and lean approach, project production management approach to delivering projects. So we recently have a large job with them where they agreed that we could pursue an integrated approach to delivering the project. The architects, the engineers, the constructors, the trade partners were all brought on early. And we were able to develop a method of working together, which we said to the owner, we were confident that it would produce better outcomes. And we nudged up against creating a true risk reward kind of contract, an integrated form of agreement. But the owner was concerned that, again, that the productivity risk really was ours to control, and that therefore we should really deal with a GMP type of contract. So we were willing to take that bet because we were sufficiently confident that we would be able to achieve superior performance in terms of productivity by working together differently. So we've been through the project, we're about 90% done. The customer said that typically they would see 0.85 on their projects as a range of productivity from field operations. And across the board for all of our self-performed scopes and the trade contracted MEP scopes, we're running at 1.15 across the project. So again, it's a proof for me again in the pudding that if you contract to work together differently and actually do the work that way, that the results will prove that it can actually be done less expensively, faster, safer, and with higher quality than the traditional methods of approaching work. So that's what I would offer, Fernando.
Right. Fantastic. So let's jump to Gary.
Well, it's where do I start with this one? I could get a long list of things. Just a few here. Subcontracting and subcontracting can really get in the way because it exponentially increases the number of parties involved and demands on communication, introduces greater variability, and that impedes flow. We had a real, second one would be the intense focus we had on craft productivity, which I chuckled when Will said the owner wasn't willing to take craft productivity risk. I learned that it doesn't really matter all that much. And we even had high-level metrics for craft productivity, okay, right to the top. What we found ourselves doing is optimizing craft productivity, but project performance didn't change. Hey, well, how does that happen? Well, people were very focused on getting good craft productivity numbers. When a crew got stopped, what did they do? Well, they're getting whipped for the good numbers, so they went and found something else to do. That something else to do was generally not in the project plan, didn't need to be done when it was being done. And so we had partially completed work. They got started on something else that was partially completed, came back to the original thing. And what happened is the amount of work we had started but not finished, that's called work in process or WIP. If you're from manufacturing, you've heard it called WIP. When that gets beyond a certain level that's optimal for production, the length of the project is going to extend. And we found this intense focus on craft productivity driving mountains of WIP. Mountains of WIP, and our projects were taking longer than we wanted. Probably my third one is that skin in the game. I've got so many scars over that. We tried to create skin in the game with liquidated damages, which are just wonderful until somebody gets into the penalty box. And oh my gosh, when somebody gets in the penalty box, it's life or death. And really, really, really bad things happen to your project. So if you want to shoot yourself in the foot, just put a liquidated damages in your project and hope you never get there. But if you do, heaven help you, because it's not going to cause the behaviors, and rightly so, human nature being what it is, nobody wants to, you just can't afford to experience those. And we found incentives the same way. As long as everybody was getting the payout, life was wonderful. But when incentives didn't get the payout or were take back, people revert to their old behaviors very quickly. Circle the wagons around what they can control, what they know, guard their contract, don't share their electricians, etc. And again, the project all suffers.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Mark.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found, folks, was you use a lot of the same contractors and over again on particular jobs, and both sides start to get a little bit ticked off at each other, and you say, you know what, that's it. We're going to go and look for some other group out there that can do this, because these folks don't seem to be able to pulling it off. And so you'll go out and you'll say throw out a couple, or like Gary said, a couple go into the penalty box, and so you're going to use a new contractor. And you're so anxious to just try a different thing that make the performance improve, that you don't necessarily look strongly enough or closely enough. And we bring in groups that don't fit the mold. They just don't seem to understand how things get done at your plants. And we ended up making some of those decisions. And what ended up happening was just got more trouble than it was worth. And so thinking that we're going to improve the performance because we're going to bring in some new fresh eyes, ended up a lot of that in legal problems with all the challenges and all the issues that came about. And so what I'm trying to say is, be careful who you use. You may not be 100% happy with your current contractors, but before you jump to a new green is the grass always greener on the other side. You need to do your homework and make sure that you've checked these folks out, that they are going to come in and be able to meet the needs. Okay.
You know, you're reminding me of a client I worked with quite a bit, and they were a very sophisticated client, and they had very sophisticated project management and contract management procedures, and they were launching a large program, and every one of their major suppliers was on a corrective action plan, was failing. And so, well, what was the one thing all those contractors had in common? And for at least for a while, that would kind of rang home with that particular group. You know, where this is the great conversation. I think we have a little bit of time to even add in the question we were not sure we'd get to, but that is, okay, so how will the construction industry need to adapt, you know, to deal with the projects of the future that are becoming more and more complex? And these could be you know, concise answers, but Gary, you know, if you're going to say, if we were going to adapt and we were handing this industry off to somebody else, which I think all of us are in nearly ready to go do, that's why we're doing this. What is it you think that they'll be doing different in a few years if they're successful?
Well, what they need to be doing different, what I hope they're doing differently, is getting the project production system designed, that operating system that Will talked about, first. Then be flexible to employ the contracting strategy that best enables it to perform.
Right.
Most likely it's a combination of various forms of contracting and compensation, depending on the nature of the work, the capability of the contractor. Some contractors only know how to work on a lump sum basis, and you try to force them to work on a reimbursable basis, you know, they go wonky because they're not used to it. So sometimes you got to, you know, listen to what people are how they're used to working, and be able to adapt to that. But I think that said, underpinning all of that, from my point of view, has to be transparency. You know, the single source of truth. And project production management, like it or not, generates transparency. I'm telling you. When we were using the software for production management, production control, I could see what was going on any project in the globe from my office in Houston. I could see what was going on in the project in Kazakhstan on a daily basis. Engineering was on a weekly basis. And I'll tell you, that brings a huge amount of transparency to the organization of the world, and say, that's what's done and that's what's not done. And it's all black and white. There was one source of truth. And everybody kind of had to get used to that. Project leaders and our contracting partners kind of had to get used to that. But our own project managers, our own project leaders had to get used to that too, as well, because they weren't able to then manage the message so well.
Yeah.
Because it's just obvious what was done and what wasn't done, and what were the problems that were preventing the planned work from being done. So transparency to me is just a huge issue.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that some more.
You want me
Any
to
thoughts on that?
Yeah. So,
Yep.
Mark,
On how we're going to adapt?
yeah, shift to Mark and get his response.
Okay.
Yeah, so folks, one of the things that I've noticed in the last couple of years is there's a lot of projects, a lot of construction projects going on now that are first of a kind, things that we haven't done very often. And that could be, from my business with the electrification of a lot of industries, these are first time things that are occurring. And so with a first time, first of a kind, there's a lot of risk. And with that becomes lots of costs. You know, Gary was talking about, there's no way you can, you know, contract away risk, which is absolutely the case. And so what we need to look at is what style of contract would be best for a project where there's lots of risks, some unknowns, not exactly sure how to do it. Maybe the design's not 100% complete. And so one of the things that we need to look at is how do we, you know, come together as a group and share that risk, share the costs, share the risks. And we have models out there now, contract models that fit these kinds of circumstances quite nicely. So we need to think out of the box a little bit. You know, EPC and design bid build have been a very, very popular way of going. And I think it's time to re-examine that and say, how can we improve on those? How can we make a better, you know, group working together that is going to be on a common goal? Everyone's sort of rowing in the same direction as opposed to fighting each other. Over to you, Will.
Sure. So I guess I would start by saying I think that over the last 100 years, the construction industry has become disintegrated. And I think that what needs to happen is a reintegration in the industry. Projects, like you've heard today, they're becoming increasingly complex, they're becoming increasingly novel, and owners typically want their projects faster than they did in the past. And so the only way to tackle problems like that is one team, one vision, one result. And you've got to be able to pull from the best resources and pool them together in order to achieve those kind of outcomes. But again, the way that we typically have viewed things actually creates walls and ceilings among our project performers in ways that they're not looking for ways to work together. They're looking for ways to insulate themselves from responsibility for something that's been handed off to somebody else. So again, I think that industrialized construction, when we talk about that, we don't just mean offsite fabrication. It means integrating the kinds of ideas that Gary's talking about seeing projects as a production system, finding it to take advantage of what's the best strategy to build components of the project in various locations to combat the shrinking resources, talented resources we have. So it's really a question of seizing the opportunities that are presented by the speed at which the industry is going to change. I sometimes say that our organization is looking to evolve to become a bird rather than some general contractors that are just looking to become a better dinosaur. So again, the world is going to change. The question is how fast.
Thank you. And you know what does remind me of some of the issues that we experience is that a lot of times you're bringing these things in. You talked about being new projects and first of a kind. And even if you're doing lots of them, you've got new players coming in. And sometimes we don't spend the time to educate people on what they're signing and what and why they're signing it, or and that's always a challenge. And there's another concept, which led to what kind of Gary indicated in project production systems. When you took that at the EPC or the AEC, the core team, everybody signs these nice little contracts, but then other contracts get written below that, the sub level, the vendor level, the subcontractor level. And what we call that is a contracting quilt, right? So if all these things are linked together, are they really, or did you sign something or procure something where all of a sudden your material flows aren't right? If somebody's behaving differently because that's what's in their contract. They're motivated, like what Mark said. Hey, man, this is how I get my bonus, so I don't really care about you guys. So how do you align, all that through these integrated types of contracts or collaborative types of contracts is really where I think the future is going. But it's a great conversation. So I'm gonna go through a little different question here. Really, it gets more into the sociological side of things, the psychology side of things. And that's, lots of people will say that trust and transparency are important. Hear that everywhere. How do you balance trust and transparency with the need to stay in control, right? Get a job done. So Gary, why don't we start with you?
Well, Fernando, I'm not sure I buy the premise of that question. That
There you go.
having trust and transparency is the opposite of control. There are somehow counter opposed to control. In fact, I think the only way you can truly have control, I'm not talking about project controls, okay, there's control of the work, which is how decisions are made on a daily basis, a weekly basis, things that are done to take action. I think it's only through transparency that you can have true control, good control. We got to know, unless you know what's really done and not done, the actual status of the work, particularly in engineering. Oh my goodness. And what's preventing what I want to have done or need to have done from being done, so that leadership are focused on solving the real problems, not the perception of problems, or not what's, you got to remove the barriers and solve the problems that are preventing the planned work, the needed work from being done. And that's the cadence that a project needs to have. That's control, okay? And if you don't have transparency, you'll never get there. I will never forget working with a company who, I don't know how I don't know if I could say this politely or not for a webinar, but they were just they were just not prone to tell the truth. I'll just put it that way. And I would have daily meetings with them. I said, why don't you have anybody at substation or a workstation, blah, 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 out in the field? This was in a very remote work site across the globe. And I said, oh, no, they're there. They're there today. I said, well, I had my crew take pictures this morning. Let's look at them. And there was nobody there. There were no trucks there. Oh, well, we might have misstated that.
Right.
You know, and they had their own set of books. They had their own schedule that it was not shared with us. And so we were like working on two different projects, and it was control was just a fantasy because we couldn't work off the same information and decide together what we could do to enable the project, help the contractor succeed, and help ourselves succeed without the honest truth in front of us and facing the honest truth. You know, I don't think control is possible.
Wow.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I think transparency is vital, but as you observe, the people that are out there working, you have to gain their trust somehow, so they do their work. So, Will, you probably have something to say about that.
Sure, Fernando. So again, projects are really temporary social systems. We view them as a way to get work done, but they're actually the way to get humans to work together. When we began the Sutter initiative, we had what we called the 5 big ideas. And one of the big ideas was to increase the relatedness of project participants. And what we meant by that is typically on projects, people come together as strangers and they often leave as enemies. And the question we posed is, how could we make people feel like they were working with colleagues rather than adversaries? And so we invested a lot of energy in actually building personal relationships among team members, not just among the leaders, starting with the leaders and then moving out and through the project organization. Because when people care about each other, they actually take care of what matters to each other. And so you talk about trust and transparency, you have to be intentional about the way you build trust. And our industry has been built on a legacy of distrust. Owners don't trust contractors, contractors don't trust engineers, and nobody trusts the inspectors. So we have a lot of ground to make up in terms of righting the ship and getting people headed in a different direction. And the only way to do that is to acknowledge our legacy, our history, and be very intentional about building trust, recognizing and making and keeping commitments. So again, I think that if you're going to have a collaborative, integrated approach, you have to be willing to invest the time in building, we call them durable personal relationships, because you're always going to have challenges on projects. It's not like working together on a collaborative, integrated project means that there are no problems. It just means that you swarm them together and solve them. So you have to have enough elasticity in the relationships. When things go bad, we're willing to stretch and support each other rather than step apart and actually start pointing fingers. So that's what I would say, is really focus on the personal relationships.
There we go. Mark, what do you got? A few words here.
Will, I couldn't agree with you more. My gosh, those were some nuggets, folks, if you're listening. A project is like a social project of communication. That is so crucial. I couldn't agree more. I got to tell you one thing that happened to me. This was the absolute opposite. We had a craft group come in to do some work. They were doing rewinds on a generator for us, and they were so convinced that their way was better than anyone else that when they were doing their job, they wouldn't let anyone else watch. They didn't want any other craft groups watching because they were going to steal their technology. So they actually put up barriers and fences around what they were doing. It was just unbelievable. Talk about the opposite of a social project here. It was just unbelievable. They sat in a different group. We all had a common cafeteria. They sat in a different group away from everybody else. It was just unbelievable. Anyway, we didn't get them back. Surprise, surprise. But really, transparency and actually relating to your fellow worker, so important. Couldn't agree any more with that. And then that is the crucial way. And it goes a little bit counter to some of the way we set up some of these contracts, where it's a competitive bid. You've got competitors working together, and we do need to find ways to defeat that sort of premise and get to a situation where everyone is rowing in the same direction. And it's a challenge. It truly is a challenge, but we got to get there, folks. Yeah. Back to you, Fernando.
Yeah, that's a great set of responses here, and I would agree that part of our, at least what I feel is important and what we've done, is that you have to identify the different personality types within your groups, because sometimes you have to immediately find that triple type A person that figures they've got it figured out and this is the way they're going to go do it, and then there's a person sitting next to them that says, I have a better answer. Can't I just say something? You got to dig that out of them. So it's really it's really a critical part, this whole concept of trust, transparency, and to gain that level of control that you need. So hey, John.
It's deeply embedded in the industry. I mean, I came from the contracting side, and I was a project engineer and a project manager, and our job was to go exploit every weakness we could to build every claim that we could. I mean, that was explicitly, it wasn't subtle at all. And that we were to kind of view the engineer and architect as the adversary, and we prepared for battle, and guess what we found? And sometime pretty early in my career, I decided that was not such a smart way to go, and I found some real wisdom. I got a real nugget there, that it's only through transparency that you have real control. Gary, that'll probably find its way on a couple of my slides or something from now with the attribution view.
For sure.
So
that's a lot.
I hope the other folks on the webinar have found this interesting. I'm not seeing lots of questions or takeaways on the chat. So if you have that, folks out there listening, what are you hearing? What are you hearing that you didn't expect to hear? Particularly, what are you hearing that might kind of change how you're thinking about what you're seeing? And so with that in mind, the last question we really had here was, okay, what can the audience do now to move? What can you do? You may not be the CEO of your organization, but what can you do where you are to kind of help us move the industry in the right direction with regard to these contracting methods? And we'll just leave it open, whoever wants to speak up about that.
Well, I can get it started.
Yeah.
Also, there was a question in the chat about joint ventures, which we have a lot of significant joint ventures at this point, where we're not only trying to build and align the venture partners, but on these kinds of projects, we also have our trade partners, which, because of the risk reward sharing, in essence, it's one big joint venture. And I was thinking about, again, how do you begin aligning people around the idea of, I'll call it the one team, one vision, one result. And I can say that one of the things we use, I don't know whether people can even remember back to the movie Miracle on Ice. And it's about the U.S. hockey team and how they came together to defeat the Soviet Union in hockey. But there's a scene in there where the team is skating lines over and over and over and over again. And the coach basically, Herb was basically making them skate until they realized that it wasn't the name on the back of the jersey that mattered, it was the name on the front of the jersey. What team do you really play for? And so again, one of the things we really focus on is building these relationships and creating a esprit de corps at the team level. And so I would say, going to the specific question here, no matter what your contract structure is today, you can go to work on creating the social fabric that's necessary to improve project outcomes. You can build personal relationships, not just with people on your side of the team, but across traditional boundaries. You can begin finding ways to instill in folks this idea of one team, one vision, one result. And so I think that is one area that you can go to work on. The other thing is, I'll just offer, there's a lot of research that's been accumulated that demonstrates that different methods of contracting will have different outcomes on the projects, and CII research verifies that as well. Going back to an early CII study that was done by Professor Victor Sanvito, and where they looked at different contracting models. And at that point, they were looking at design, build, CM at risk, and traditional delivery. That was over 25 years ago. To the recent look on I squared PD, where teams were looking at what does it take to produce better project results? And they said integration and collaboration. The higher the team scores on integration and collaboration, the direct correlation to positive project outcomes. So you can also begin aligning your research, if you will, to help your organization understand that this isn't just make-believe. This isn't just folks sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. This is business people driving towards business results by looking for better solutions, and that the academic research is now verifying that these better solutions actually do produce better results. So that's where I would start.
So Will, I want to pick up on that because you're absolutely right about the collaboration and transparency. And it makes it sound like, oh, everyone just is, holding hands and it's an easy way, but it absolutely is not. When you're in those situations, you're each holding each other responsible to get their position, their job done, and holding them accountable to hand off to you and likewise. And so it's actually almost a little bit more intense because you've got all your partners looking over your shoulder to make sure you're getting your job done. It's not necessarily easier, let me tell you, but it absolutely is more effective in the end when you're pulling together all in the same direction.
Yeah, I would just myself add, and there's a lean, I guess, procedure called the 5 whys, and I think that's great. And I believe if everyone just goes and looks at the lessons learned that you take from every job and you file away and stuff somewhere, if you start looking at that more often and say, hey, why are my materials not showing up on time, or why is procurement doing this thing to me, or why isn't engineering why is engineering producing what they're produced instead of what I need when I need it? And why is construction trying to always searching for stuff and fragmenting the plan because nothing's ready? I think if you go and look at the root cause and then align and look at what your contractor saying is happening or your agreements are saying, you'll start seeing the root cause of problems. And I believe you'll figure out that your contracting methods, your contracting styles, are not aligned with your desired outcomes for your project. So, I think it's easy to go do that. You already have a lot of this data, right? You don't educate anybody on your contract. Hey, you just sign this, all this 55 pages, and I need you to produce a 30,000 line schedule in there. Well, what does that do for you, right? So anyway, I'm thinking there are simple things that you can do if you got the stomach for it, especially your owners out there that are the ones that start this process of contracting. I'll let somebody else jump in.
I think the contractors, vendors, suppliers have to respond to whatever the owner sets up, right? I mean, they kind of set the rules for the game, and they have a special responsibility to step out and change the practices, at least my point of view. And I think something that's been really impactful to me is to grow the world to see that every organization, Will's company, a supplier, whoever it is, they have a production system, and because they're organized themselves to do certain things, right? And they have a fiduciary responsibility to optimize their own production system for their benefit of their shareholders or stakeholders, right? You got to be honest and come to grips with that. So when you see that everybody has a production system, it's optimized around them trying to maximize value for their shareholders. How do you then align those production systems on a project so they intersect and are beneficial? And that's no simple answer. That's no trivial thing that I just threw out there, because it takes some real thought. And so let me just pick on structural steel for a minute, or pipe fabrication for a minute. We over and over and over, we'd go contract with the pipe fabrication shop, and we'd give them a gazillion spool drawings and say, make these for us, give us a price, unit price, or whatever. Okay. Well, then that pipe fab shop is going to optimize how they make those pipe spools, right? They'd be stupid not to. Well, what if I said, no, that's not what I want. I want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want a 6-inch. I want a 2-inch. I want a 4-inch. I want a stainless. I want a carbon steel. And they're all mixed up, and they're in the order that I need them. Well, it's going to cost more money. Yeah, it's going to cost more money. But you know something? It's going to cost me less money at the end of the day, because that supports the flow I need on the project. And that's what I mean by think carefully about how to line in production systems, create a temporary production system for that company that supports your project. And all kinds of things melt away.
I think that's a whole other webinar.
Almost an oxymoron. Okay, and because does it really take 2 years to make a component? No, most of that time is in waiting. We find that typically it's a very small percentage of the lead time is actually in the making of the thing. Okay? So how do you get their production system to expose the making of the thing so you can get the thing when you need the thing? And it just, when you start thinking this through, and I think that's one of the big differences that could be made in our world, construction world here, is to start seeing things through that operating system, through production systems, and then focus on how to align those production systems to support the specific project. And if you don't know what a production system is, you got to start there to get yourself educated. Okay, now I know what they're talking about. It's not just consultant speak. It's real stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, this has been a great conversation. I think that Jenny's gonna come back on in about 1.5 minutes and tell us we're done. But Fernando, we have some, first off, let's thank these guys who have given some time here and some real nuggets. And I've known some of these guys for a while, and I still wrote down some new nuggets out of today. Curious, Fernando, we have some more webinars coming, and I think actually the one Gary just suggested about how do we align production systems is really a pretty rich one. So some past ones, I think there's a slide back there. Folks could copy a link. There's a UR code there someplace, I think, to go through.
I think you're talking about this here.
Yeah, that's where we've been. You can go find these things. That's where some publications are. I think, I don't know if Jenny can send out a link to attendees to how to go find the past webinars that she mentioned that even I didn't know was there. And then we got these coming up. You want to talk about those a bit, Fernando?
Well, also before, I mean, we have a lot of great questions, and we will be responding to these questions, about a lot of it, about the supply chain coming in, concept of risk, and how does the fabricator get involved? And so there's a lot of great questions here, and we will be answering and getting this back to everybody that is participated here. But yeah, so we do have a lot of interesting webinars coming up. This whole pull-push and con-whip, recognizing and leveraging each gets into the production system design, and that has direct implications to contracting styles. There's been some key projects, the T5 experience, and any of you that are familiar with the T5 back in the early 2000s, how often has that been repeated? And we're going to share what that means and refresh everybody, because this kind of level of project complexity is coming at us, stronger and faster. Use of last plan or constraint management, fundamental scope blocks, next gen applications, how we rethink how packages of work actually come together, TAC planning, decision making, choosing by advantages or things that we don't leverage enough, right? And how do we integrate project production management with ADP and vice versa? And another big major project experience on the D1D, an Intel story, and then the use of OKRs, if you're familiar with Google, will come at the end. So we have a lot of exciting webinars, and we really thank you for joining this one. We hope to see you on the future ones. And with that, I will hand it over to Jenny.
Thanks, gentlemen. And I will note my apologies. I think that QR code might not work. It appears that's going to take you to our old website. The last time we all got together for a next gen webinar was in 2023, and we changed over in December to our new site. We still have the exact same URL, which is construction-institute.org, but that will likely take you elsewhere. So on our new website, we have a really new and improved search engine. If you just type AWP into the search line, you will pull up every item that shows up there through the QR code. But again, like they said, I will send out, with the recording to this webinar, I'll send out the link that I mentioned that will take you to CII's YouTube channel. CII Builds is the handle for that. You can find a playlist for the webinars, and go back and reference all of those as well. So we do appreciate your time. We appreciate your comments, your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you at the next CII webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.